Hey, I'm trying to get used to it. It's just a weird idea. You gotta understand. It's like you could talk to yourself all day long and all night in your room by yourself. Although I think most people probably do it in the shower or the shower in the car. But speaking your mind aloud, those secret thoughts. That's a whole other game by itself. Whole other thing. Anyhow, so I was really fascinated with this idea here. So let's talk about the big headlines, right? Because ultimately, isn't that what's fun? It's like this world is crazy, it's falling apart. So many weird things are happening, and it's hard to figure out what exactly is going on or how to piece it together. So one thing is really important to know. One of the layers of this onion is the the vantage point of a future civilization, and how time is time does not work the way that we think it does. We misunderstand it correctly by experience having the illusion of the experience of it move in a linear fashion, right, from birth to death and everything in between. Um, but that's kind of unique. That's special. That's not even true. Um, if you want a good example of that, imagine seconds, hours, days, millennia could be thought of as nothing more than water. And like if you wanted to think of like a millennia's worth of time as like a lake, and then a teardrop's worth of time would be, you know, an 2 hours watching a movie, right? So you could think of time as being relative to the volume of water, and then of course you could freeze it, make it more compact, right? Shrink it down, or actually that expands it. Or you could, transmute it into other levels of matter, like gas, and of course, a solid. Lots of, all the states of matter. And in a realigned structure, it looks different, acts differently, but it's all just time, right? Um, so if you were to play with that idea, then you can experience time as like sitting in a bathtub. You're just in it, and multiple moments, minutes, hours, not even in the same year, the same month, or in the same place, um, or so it seems, are all simultaneously touching you in the bathtub. Or you can experience it as the shower, as a very discrete, limited line of water spraying directly at you from one point of view, and you're experiencing it from a single point. And so our minds are designed to gather all of the information that we are allowed to perceive, right? And then to fill in the rest. And it will fill in the rest according to certain preferences and preset biases, right? Our personality. We're inclined to see the world in a very certain way. Some people see things very artistically, some people very romantically, other people very scientifically, but we all have a preset uh, idea of how order is constructed, how reality operates, so that we know, oh, this event is ridiculous or it's unreal because it falls outside of the boundary of my expectations of what I think how I think things should be, or this falls firmly within the realm of my expectations. Like, yes, it fits nicely in between the book, um, the book holders on my shelf. Anything that could fit in between those two spaces, those 2 points, I consider by default real, even if I think on some intellectual or emotional or psychic level that there's something is off or wrong about it, or that I don't trust it, or that I should be suspicious of it. That so long as it falls here by default, if I'm not paying attention, if I'm asleep, if I'm just being a zombie going about my day, I'm not going to question. I'm just going to go with it. So um, that's a discrete moment, that existence of time. And so, this world is just built to uh, help us gather information, sort it, and experience it in a very specific way. Our minds come in, fill in the gaps. We collectively create a story. Uh, and it's all wonderful and it's beautiful and whatever. We do it so subconsciously, right? We do it intuitively, that we don't even think of anything of it. But we're actively creating a reality. We're actively participating with a concept of a singularity, a concept of a oneness. We call it a species, call it a planet. We have a concept of oneness. We just the best example of how the level of our conceptualization ability to truly understand, like whatever a God being or a supreme being would be, um, in the way that we most understand who we think we are and most understand what we think everything else is and everyone else in it is reality. That's we can talk about you know humanoids aloft in wafting clouds high above the reaches of the sky. We could do that, or we could just say reality, or just this idea, this we're all connected, we're all in the same soup bowl, right? No, you might be peas, you might be carrots, you might be a little nut, but we're all in the soup together, and we're all ingredients. How we taste is our reality. Anyhow, my point is this. So we're talking about this story here. And why am I going off on a tangent with reality? Oh, because it's kind of how I think, but also there's another part to it. It's we're talking about the tactics, right? We're talking about game theory, right? We're talking about, let's say for instance there really are two opposing factions, right? Which, I mean, we're talking about being in a dualistic experience, right? Where there's a good and a bad, a left and a right, and a white and a black, whatever, duality, right? Polarity. That we're always going to have an example of one of those two things, right? I'm either with this side or this side's against me, what have you, doesn't matter. We automatically think that way. Um, we organize with those polarities. And so, okay, so let's say there is like a cabal, and there really is a good side, the white hats. I think that's a good term for them. Um, then how would they interact, right? How would we know them, and what would be the evidence of their play, right? Um, and stepping aside from the more interesting question is what is the implication of their play, and then are they being played, right? Because that's where the fun questions are, because then you really start to see what's really happening, who's really behind this all, and why. But so we would see examples. The best way to understand how they play, I have found, was actually just watching stuff on the secret space program, like Cosmic Disclosure. A lot of really great stuff, even though there's some legal wrangling and some fighting there, and some of the episodes have disappeared, which is kind of funny in its own right. Um, that amuses me, because that's an indication of another type of mind, another type of thinking, another way of playing the game, another player in the game, right? Or at least the indication of a higher level of play, because nothing is random. Everything happens for a reason, even if not everything that happens needs to, right? Um, think of it as like folding a paper. Fold a paper, create a crease, there's the line. Fold it again, there's another crease, another line. But when you open it up, you've also created a point, an intersection. And that intersecting point where two creases align, that point didn't know it was going to be there until the illusion of the process, of the action of creating two folds in a piece of paper occurred, and then you perceived it. You opened it up and you perceived it to be. That point was always there, but it didn't know exactly where it was going to be until you imagined a spot for it. The waveform collapsed. A lot of stuff, right? Here's the point that I'm getting to that I find really interesting, and I see an indication with this colonial pipeline machination, because like this is so classically an example of 3D chess kind of play, right? Two different characters on a board. We're on the chessboard. Um, it's because uh, and if you decide to look at the secret space program, the cosmic disclosure stuff, really entertaining. I enjoyed it. Um, I don't know. People feel differently about supporting them. It's like, dude, everything here is corrupt. Everything here is sullied. Everything here is not pure. I mean, even those who are pure are just there's just a recognition of the fact that they're just frauds and that they're not pure, and that their pursuit of their life as they experience it as an embodied consciousness should be the purification of themselves to make themselves more clear, more transparent, more conductive, a better pane of window glass, so that light can shine into darkness, and then in so doing no longer distinguish yourself as either being light or dark, but just simply being painless illumination. So I'll just give you an example. One of the things that I've observed: inversion, the idea of inversion, and how inversion is a distracting tactic, right? Because you think, well, how sophisticated is my player? How intelligent are they? And it's like they are as clever as you are without pretending to be. And they become so good at getting you to go along with whatever they want, whatever they plan, that you don't even know that you're demanding your own agreement, right? You don't even see how perfectly you're being brainwashed, or how much the manipulation really is, and how effective it is, and how long it's been around, right? You're waking up in the middle of a game that's been playing for literally tens of thousands of years, and you automatically assume, out of a sense of self-importance and, you know, a species-wide level of arrogance that we all have, that you somehow know what's going on. You somehow can see the truth. You know what's happening, and there are others who are deceived. They don't get it. Something like that. But here's the point: we assume that this I was listening to Salty Cracker. Great stuff. I think he's hilarious. I highly recommend it. I enjoy it. I try to listen whenever I can. The guy is just brilliant, like total comedian. Um, but we say, okay, so here's an example of the current administration's uh, interesting lack of response. Like, I love this here. Joe Biden's White House announced that it's a private sector decision as to whether Colonial Pipeline should pay ransom to the cyber terrorists who attacked its system last week. There was another moment tonight where I laughed out loud. It was something that I had heard on. Uh, it was one of the Telegram channels. I'll post them up here. I'm intending it for it to be very interactive, but just this quote from Fauci about how things will be on. Oh no, what was happening with the need for masks in the future, and how they're really, how some believe them to be effective and productive. Some believe that. Others believe differently. But uh, how they were so effective, they actually pretty much single-handedly removed the flu. It's like, huh, interesting. The number of cases that we would expect seasonally associated with the flu, historically, and also just on a graph, right? Just so happened to coincide with a number of instances of uh, of infection from a specific other type of disease out there. Interesting, huh? It's amazing. It's a miracle. Miracles do exist. Um, that was the other time that I laughed tonight. But so we're talking about just a great example of, it's like just being a really good magician. It's like you want to take people's attention over here. The hand moves, the eyes divert. You're paying attention to what's happening. People know they're going to try to understand, and they know that people are going to try to understand whatever is being reported to them as happening. They're going to try to understand that and place it in that nice comfort realm, right? That Goldilocks zone of a willing suspension of scrutiny, right? The Goldilocks zone of the willing suspension of scrutiny, and so long as it fits in there, you're fine, right? So we have the actions, we have this. What are they reporting to us, right? So we'll just go through it. What are they reporting? They're reporting that the reason why there are long lines at gas stations, the reason why gas is shooting up, the reason why there's this current inflammation on the East Coast, like half of like a good, I don't know, quarter, at least the eastern seaboard, apparently, of the United States is going through this massive multi-state, um, struggle, right? There is a they're all facing a collective hardship, right? Something is happening to them all at the same time that is causing them to break free of the tight grip of a day, of how we go through our routine, right? Because now they can't just simply mindlessly do something, something that they took for granted, something that they just assumed would always be there, now is something that they are paying a lot of attention to. So you got to think of it that way. It's like something that people don't usually pay attention to, that usually is never an issue, suddenly has become so big of a matter. They can't not think about it all collectively, and so many of them are going through the same thing, and it's jarring. Right? That's the point. It's jarring. So they say, okay, so if this is so on the face of it, it's like, oh, this is bad, right? This is negative. Why? Well, because people are suffering, and suffering is bad. And anyone who's, I would say, at least 40 and above, from what I can tell, that seems to be my observation, is that anyone below that doesn't understand, or potentially doesn't understand, that probably the most productive moment in your entire life will be a moment of suffering. There will probably never be a better instance of growth than when you are bereaved, when you are absolutely shattered, when your world cracks, it breaks, and all the things you planned, all the things you thought you were going to do, and the people that you thought you were going to do them with, they're just not there anymore. The plans, they don't apply. So what do you do now? You got to put the pieces of the world back together. But there's a period where it's going to resist that, because like, depending on what's happening, there might literally be a process of bereavement. There might literally be a rebuilding of a house, or moving to a new location, or leaving a school. So, but once you pass that moment, there's an opportunity to rebuild, and that's the point. To put something new in the place of what in a space that once had something else standing in it. And what you put there can be something significantly different from what preceded it, which is what we want. We want that. That's how things change and grow. That's evolution. Sometimes there has to be a big thing that happens to allow something big that's coming to have the space of its own happening. There just isn't any way around it. So, on the face of it, you say, yeah, so that's bad. So that must be the actions of a bad side. But so much good can come out of this, because people are waking up. Even, it's like an alarm bell. You don't. So many people misunderstand the how to read some of these things, in my opinion, right? Because you try to be too literal. It's like, well, this is happening, and so therefore this, and so now like some kind of like you know, early 1920s silent black and white movie. You're a cartooned mustachioed villain, and you're just rubbing your hands thinking, okay, so now that I have perpetrated this evil, now how can I then take this specific evil into something even more diabolical? Like, just this very rudimentary, uh, very contrived, very static, very formulaic. Like, oh, I am robbing a bank because now I'm gonna take the money and I'm gonna build an evil empire or something. It's like just a bad movie, or a good movie depending on what kind you like. But um, so so you say, okay, so then a lot of good can come out of it. So then therefore, could this actually be the actions of the good side? We're going to watch it. We're going to find out. We're going to watch this carefully over the next couple of days. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually was the White Hats taking advantage of the opportunity of what was already going to happen, right? Because they have looking glass technology, which we'll get to later, so they can see the future with quantum technology. And so they knew what was going to happen. And if you want to know how to play a time game, the trick of playing the time game is not trying to stop what's going to happen, but how to uh, put the advantage of whatever must occur in the direction that favors um, the trajectory that you want to see things go into. So it's basically improvisation. You never say no. You always act with yes. You just go with it. And so I can see that there's like this was already being planned. The response is just so fascinating, ridiculous. Um, it was something that was already going to happen. But how and when and in whose in how to transform this opportunity into something that works for an argument of awakening versus for an argument of falling asleep, right? So that which promotes more liberty and freedom and that which promotes more oppression and control, right? Because if you want, it's as much a choice to remain asleep as it is to awaken, and a lot of that happens on a subconscious level. But when a moment when a moment where a switch is going to be flipped, but you don't know in which direction, you don't know if the light's going to turn on or if the light's going to turn off. If all you know of the future is that at this one particular moment a switch will be flipped, then you want to make sure that whomever, like whichever consciousness, right? Let's say, the person in the room at that one moment who's going to actually flip the switch, in a quantum environment that they're either going to be motivated towards light or motivated towards dark, towards selflessness, towards selfishness, right? Service to others, service to self. They're going to be oriented one way or the other. They're both going to exist, but because we experience the illusion of time, we're going to imagine the illusion of moving between the two of them, like oscillating. So you want to wait for the right moment to strike. And so, in my opinion, looking at this is a pretty clear indication of a white hat taking advantage of a cabal ploy to opportunistically push people towards greater catharsis and disruption, and so and questioning, and so to greater sense of freedom as they seek to more independently look for answers, and then become very disenchanted or unconvinced with how people are responding, who should be in charge, and what they're saying, right? Because that doesn't make sense. Like if if these people are benevolent and they mean the best for me, is this how a benevolent person who's acting in my own best interest, is this how they would act? Is this what I expect? Or are they acting in a way that really points out that they don't care about me and they are very happy to um, feast on the spoils of my suffering? Um, and that's how you can tell. That's how you can tell, because there's a level of incompetence here that's just really fascinating. Like they're not in control of it. Like they didn't plan it. They didn't know it was coming, and they had a bungled response to it. Right? Whether you agree with them or not, um, if you're in a seat of power, you should always project confidence and strength, not ineptitude and lack of concerted response, right? And so, does this make them look bad or does it make it look good? I don't know. Depends on how asleep you are. Depends on how willing you are to question what you're being told and what you're being shown, and how ultimately, um, and I know this is kind of convoluted, but I think it's really interesting. Going back to this whole idea of inversion, say, well, okay, so this is bad, but in the tactic inversion, it's like, no, this is someone who's playing 3D chess with another player who knows they are also playing 3D chess. We're the only ones who don't know, right? Well, for the most part, we don't know. But they play that way. They can only play that way. So they know that they're not playing for this action. They're playing for the next three actions. They're trying to steer and guide the responses that are 3 and 4 and 5 turns down the lane, right? They're, well, I guess just playing real chess because I understand that's kind of chess, but there's multiple dimensions here, right? So there's, a lot going on. It's a world. You're playing chess with the world. Um, and so um, when we're talking about inversion, we're talking about, well, you got to look at the opposite. You got to understand there's two different sides playing, and that ultimately the only way to try to control someone who knows just as much as you do is to make them think they're in control, to give them the illusion of your own weakness, to make it seem as though they're winning, right? Or to create so much of an opportunity that you will present a position of forced weakness, um, that it'll make it seem that the others have a lot more latitude, right? There's a lot. They don't have to act so strictly and specifically. It's like they have like a range of possible responses, and so they will be more willing to make a mistake. They will actually make a mistake because they think they're in control. They think that they have all the power, and they do have power. They have, some power, obviously, or there wouldn't be a game, right? There has to be a division of power. That's how that works. So I find this really interesting. There was a lot of things that I was looking at, like the stuff with uh, the 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 Chinese rockets falling from the sky. Isn't that weird? Think about that. In the media, they're talking about the possibility that there are huge chunks of metal that could randomly fall at any time. We can't predict it. And when it falls, wherever it falls, it's going to devastate. It's like, huh, I know that sounds bad. I know that sounds like something you would never, ever want to happen. But then there's a story about the rods of God, right? Which is really cool. You should look it up. You should look it up. If I was more organized, I would have like a video already prepared, but just look it up. It's everywhere. And how, they drop these tungsten composites metal rods from an orbiting satellite from space, and it would be specifically targeting a location on Earth, and it would have the devastating detonation of a nuclear bomb, but without the radiological fallout, which is like, hey, great, all of it's like a fat-free chip or like sugar-free chocolate. It's like all of the pleasure and none of the guilt, right? So it's great. Why not? But isn't that interesting? Like, I just kind of thought of this, like, it's when you think about, because that's what we're really talking about. We're going to be more organized here, but we're really talking about how does consciousness work, how does reality work, and how do you learn to control it, right? And so you think about it, it's like, well, the consciousness is a lot like a garden, and what you plant in it now is what you're going to see grow weeks from now, right? And what you nurture is what grows, and what you starve is what doesn't. It's like a garden. So you want to make sure that whatever is being seeded out there is being properly nurtured, so that when it happens, or like for instance something like a Raz of Gaz, like it's not like people will already be seeded with it. They'll say, okay, that's a possibility. Like we'll accept that when it happens. It falls between the two book holders on my shelf. I accept that this is a possibility. Why? Because I heard it on the news. Because we all collectively had the experience of wondering, what are the Chinese doing? Why would they do something so stupid and that's so reckless? And it's like now we all have to deal with someone else's recklessness and lack of foresight, and we just don't know where this is going to fall. And isn't that an interesting idea to seed, right? Isn't that just an interesting thing to put out there? Like someone was foreshadowing what's going to come, and if that's the case, then who is likely to use it and why? Which, if you do a little bit of research, you'll see that, and whatever. It's not. I don't want to get too far down the weeds in that. It's just it was just an example of that, and I see this as an example of this too. I mean, it's easy to see that it's a really great way for this administration to make a much more authoritarian stab at greater control for national resources, right? Because this shouldn't happen. This is not acceptable. This is not good. This is not an example of people who know what they're doing, or who know how to fix it. They don't know how to run a country, right? This is not a good example of running a country. It's a very, very poor one. But ineptitude for them would also be opportunity, because like, okay, well then, you're right. This person didn't do a good job. We got the solution. We need to create a committee. We need to pass a law, and we need to have this organization now be in direct control, of this to make sure it never happens again. like 9/11 and the Patriot Act. We're going to pass this legislation which is going to completely just be atrocious, like an affront to civil liberties. We're going to pass this, which we just happen to have it ready before. Hey, don't worry about it. We like to think ahead, like we know what's going to happen, and we're planning for it, and we're trying to steer you in that direction. Because you would never ever agree to this bill if you didn't see a reason for it, if you didn't understand what bad could happen first, right? And so that's how we're controlled. That's one of the inversions, right? We are going to show you what's bad that can happen first so that you can choose to do something that is perceived to be good because it's the opposite, because this sucked. We don't want this. We didn't understand it could be this way. Stop this from happening again, right? And so inversion, right? They get you to agree with the one thing you would never agree to otherwise, were it not for the fact that you experienced something that you disliked. And so say, well, that could very easily still be like a cowbell side, or doesn't have to necessarily be a white side. But it's like, well, but think about it. Think about it. Um, I see. I'm just, you gotta look around. It's like, are people are they responding to this in a way which is asking really for less freedom? Is it really asking for more control? Or is it asking for more accountability? Is it asking um, for for local resources to step up and say, well, this feels like a failure on a federal level, right? So we need our local governments and municipalities to step up and take back some power because the current reigning power structure is failing us. And while philosophically and sociologically, that might be a really interesting thing to talk about and debate. But when it has a very practical reflection on the world as you know it, as you're experiencing it, that's a different story. Like our willingness to indulge in the stupidity of others is significantly reduced when we have to actually live with their stupidity as something that we can't just simply change the channel and avoid, right? It's our daily lives now, and so we are compelled to confront it, to do something about it. So I really just wanted to share that. Definitely, again, just to recap a couple things, definitely just take a look. I would recommend looking at the Secret Space Force stuff on YouTube, mostly just like cosmic disclosure. I think it's really good to know. It's good to know. Yeah, it's aliens and space stuff and Star Trek kind of stuff, and it's. I think for some of you it probably would be too far for you to go. And that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to. You don't have to believe in Santa Claus, but you know who he is, and you know why people dress up the same way every Christmas, and what Christmas is, and why you give presents. You don't have to believe something is true in order for it to have a very real impact in your life, to have real consequences, and that it reveals in the experience of something that is knowingly a lie that a greater truth is honored and revealed, right? In that case, like a a spirit of giving, of of joy, of of a sense of jubilation in at the darkest time of the year, right? The longest nights of the year. Um, to remember to remain hopeful and cheerful um, in the darkest times, right? And there's a great lesson in that, isn't there? Because if you can remain joyous and cheerful and smiling and happy, no matter how dark it gets, you'll know to be gifted with something well worth the effort and well worth the suffering and the waiting, right? You will be gifted with something that you will you will not think twice for the cost of, just to have it. So, right, just some things to consider. We'll be more specific, and I was thinking that I would read it, but it's like, you get it, it's not a secret to anybody. All right, laters.